Hey, real quick before I begin, make sure you subscribe so we can keep getting the word out. All right, hit that like button too. All right, let's get going. Hey everybody, and welcome to Faithcast, where we share the truth and love without pushing religion. Okay, so you came here because of the clickbait of, oh my gosh, you got sued by the denomination. Yes, we did. Now, in my previous video about the denomination, I talked about us leaving the church, and I seemed to ramble forever to try and get to the point of saying we left for financial reasons. We decided just to let go of everything and trust God and move on. It took me forever to say that. So, if you just don't want to watch the entire video and you want the Cliff Notes version, here we go. As prior to the church closing, they made the decision to sell the parsonage. There was a bit of a process that went through. The first people that were going to buy it ended up falling through. They still wanted to sell the parsonage because they didn't want to stick anybody with it if they were still going to close. And so, because my wife and I were going to be leaving the denomination, had no place to live, the couple members of the local congregation said, we should sell it to you. So we bought the parsonage. Then, after the church closed, we'd already purchased it before the church closed. After the church closed, we were now living there. Once all that information made it to the conference level disagreed with that sale, and so they took us to court to get the house back. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. Pretty anticlimactic. Now, if you want to hear all the details of how they managed to do that and what happened and what the final decision was and what was said in court, and most importantly, and this is why I'm doing the videos. I'm not doing the videos to slam the denomination. I'm doing these videos on the United Methodist Church to give insights and information to a lot of the small congregations that find it hard to follow along with what's going on the higher denominational level, who makes the decisions, who has the power, who's going to make the choices for you and your local church if and when the split happens. So I'm going to keep doing these videos, and this is why I'm doing this. I want you to hear the details of this, so if you're having issues at your local level, and what is your church doing, what decisions are you guys making, hey, here's some things to look out for, here's some questions to ask, and here's some things to ponder. So, all right, let's get to the details. So, prior to the church deciding to close, they were scrambling in a multitude of different ways, trying to figure out how to better adjust their stewardship and figure out where their money was going, what was happening, and how could they, honestly, like any corporation or company, how could they dump, bad assets? And one of the poor assets that the local church had was their parsonage. There was no pastor living in it. We were serving a multi-point charge. We were living clear over in a different town. And this house had been built in the, right around 1900, late 1800s, and was given to the local church in the 1960s to be used as a parsonage, which it was used as a parsonage up until early 1990s, at which point it sort of got transferred over and became a rental property. And let's be honest, and a lot of you, especially a lot of you in the rural areas that still have these parsonages, you know how hard it is to try and financially keep up with everything that's happening and the things that go on with these buildings. In fact, this house was in such sad shape, they were renting it, are you ready for this? $350 a month. The whole house with a double lot. That's $350 a month. That's all they would rent it for, because if they wanted to ask more for the rent, then really they were going to be taking all of that rent money and putting it into the property to try and make it worth, the actual $600 to $700 that it should have been worth the rent. And the family that lived there, they were good with it because they knew that any little fixes that had to happen, they just took care of it because they knew they were only paying $350 a month for rent. So for a long time, this is how things went on, and the church seemed to be happy with it. So moving forward to when the church finally made the vote and the decision to be like, okay, we need to do something with this property, they went to the family that was living there and said, look, would you guys like to buy it? And the asking price that they were going to put on it to sell the property was like $25,000 because this place was hurting. So the family talked about it, discussed it. Nobody really came up with any final decisions, and it sort of sat on a back burner for a month or two, if I remember right. And then tragically, the father of the family who was living there died unexpectedly. And it was a huge hit for the whole community. It was a great guy, very active in the Boy Scouts. I mean, it was just a good family. And so at that point, the church, being the church, said, okay, we realize that financially that house is a hindrance to us, but she just lost her husband. Her sons are at the age where they were getting ready to go to college. We are not going to traumatize her. We just sort of put it on the back burner. Nobody was going to touch it. And then it went a few more months, and the church realized, look, it doesn't matter what we do with that property. The main church building is killing us financially. We need to make a huge move. We need to do something. And it was brought up again, going, well, look, we had talked about selling that house. And it's interesting because at that point, I was actually defending the conference. And I said, look, you guys have already made the vote to sell the property. As long as you're still together, then you should move forward and sell it, because when you guys close, the conference gets stuck with all these properties. So if you guys can just sell it, you won't be able to do anything with the money. It'll just move into the capital fund for the church, which means then when the church closed, the conference would just end up getting the money. And so if we just took care of the headache now, that's just a win for everybody. And there was actually discussion at that point. There were a few people in the church who wanted to just sell the house and the property to this woman for $1. But that couldn't get agreed on. And actually, when I talked to a couple elders in the church later, they were like, oh, the conference never would have allowed that to happen. Which it's sort of sad, because looking back on it, I wish we could have just signed that property off to her and let her and her sons live there. That would have been the right thing to do. But nobody could come to an agreement on that. And so when we went to her and said, look, here's what's happening. The church is going to close. You're not going to be able to stay here. Like I knew, everybody knew, not just me, everybody knew once the church closed, the conference was not going to keep using this as a rental for $350 a month. And at least that was maybe we should have asked somebody, but that's pretty much what we all felt was going to be. So at that point, she was like, I can't, I'm here by myself. I can't take care of this place. I can't keep it up. I'm not going to be able to buy it. And we understood, which then put us in the situation of, all right, do we get a realtor? What happens? And somebody in the congregation, I want to say somebody because I know who it was. I remember the whole, but I don't want to use any names. I don't want to use any names through any of this because I don't want to slander anybody. I want to insult anybody. This isn't what this video is about. It's not about getting at people or trying to get back at the conference or the denomination. It's just about telling the story. And so I don't want to use any names, but I remember who brought up the suggestion that they sell the house to Cathy and I because we were going to be leaving the denomination, which means we were going to be leaving the parsonage we were in. We had no place to live. Now, we could have just found an apartment. It would have been fine. But members of the congregation came to us and said, we want to sell it to you. And we're like, all right, well, we already talked about $25,000. And they were like, no, I don't know if we want to sell it for that because you're going to be our pastor. And I was like, well, look, maybe what we need to do is figure out where are we really at with this house. Now, at the time, I was serving on the board of directors for a local United Methodist youth camp, and we had used an individual who came in and did a full inspection of the whole property. And I mean, he didn't hold anything back, and I really respected the guy. I respected what he had to say in terms of that camp. And I said, look, we have this guy in the conference that does work for the conference. How about we bring him in and let him see where we're at with the property? And so we had a building inspection done, and it was about 19 or 20 pages of here is everything that is wrong with this place. And it was worse than I thought. I knew, knowing what I know about construction, I knew there were a couple issues. They kept, the people that lived there, the family that lived there at the time, they would tell me that they would blow the lights at the bottom of the stairs. And when I went in and actually saw the place, they had little stickers on the switches, and they said the switches upstairs to downstairs, if anybody knows anything about three-way switches, the switches had to be in the right sequence, or else either the light would not work or it would blow the light out. I was like, how can you blow the light out? And I realized there were 2 live feeds, one going to one of the switches and one of them, I do believe, going to the light. And so if things got out of sequence, it went from 110 to shooting 220 at this light. And I'm like, that's just wrong. That's just one example of things that got done poorly in this place over, from 1960 to 2015. And so the inspection report came back and everybody read it and everybody's like, oh my gosh. And actually there were a few people going, maybe you guys shouldn't buy it either. I mean, this place is... And so my wife and I talked about it and we said, look, and the church came up with the price they wanted to sell it to us for. They're like, we're going to sell it to you for $15,000 for 2 reasons. So this was their decision and why they said it. Because $15,000 for a house, pretty cheap. I don't care who's watching this video right now. I know you got to be thinking, wow, that doesn't seem on the up and up. I don't blame you if you think that. Here was the church's reasoning for that. One, they originally were going to sell it for $25,000. When they decided they wanted to sell it to us and they gave us this price, they said, because one, you're still going to be a pastor in our community. And looking at the book of Timothy, we are called to be a good congregation and to take care of our pastor. And so, even though we're not going to be the denomination, we can sell this house. It's our right to do it. This is what we want to do. And two, we all just saw the inspection report and we know what you guys are in for to actually try and renovate this place, because that was our plan. We're like, all right, we'll buy it. It's a historic home. It sits pretty much in the middle of town. We'll be the good stewards and do a total renovation of this place and try to bring it back to the historical aspect. In fact, the street that runs right next to it is named after the man who lived in the house. And so that was the decision. That was what was made. So we purchased the house for $15,000. And again, if anybody is thinking, wow, that was really cheap and red flags would be going off, I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't blame anybody in the conference. I wouldn't blame anybody at the district level. I wouldn't blame anybody for coming to us and going, wait a minute. Let's take a look at this, because this doesn't seem on the up and up. And to this day, I was willing to go to court and defend, here's what happened, here's where the money came from, I had nothing to hide. I, to this day, have nothing to hide about any of it. This was the decision that was made. We all agreed on it, and here's where we were going to go with it. So we bought it. Now, there's one thing that had to happen, is in the book of discipline, it says that for the sale to go through, because all of the buildings are held in trust by the conference, that the district superintendent has to release the building from the trust so it can be sold. And so we went through that whole process. Everything was done. Everything was signed. We paid the money, got the lawyer, deed was done. And about a month or so after we had moved into the house and we'd already started doing a few $1,000s worth of some stuff that needed to be done right away. I mean, the exhaust was wrong on the hot water tank. There was an issue with the furnace. There was an issue with the kitchen sink and the drainage. Just a bunch of little things that were adding up really quick. They're like, we got to take care of these right now before we even start the renovation. So we were already a few $1,000s into starting to do the renovations, and then we got served with papers, and they were saying they want the house back. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. So in the brief that the attorneys for the conference submitted, they stated that pursuant to church law, in cases of church abandonment, closure, blah, 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 all local church property is held in trust for the Western Pennsylvania, blah, 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 United Methodist Church as the local church's successor in interest. Now, I say blah, blah, blah because the issue I have with this is it's true. It's absolutely true. It's in cases of church abandonment or closure. The church had not abandoned or closed when the building was sold. The church was still open and active, and that's something very important. I want everybody to remember that as long as you are still open as a United Methodist Church, if you have not made the final vote to close, then you haven't closed. You are still open for serving God until you make that vote. That is the deadline. So, and I heard that from several elders in the denomination as we were going through all of this. And then the second part of it says, also pursuant to church law, a district superintendent must sign or offer its consent on the instrument of sale or deed. The district superintendent is the conference officer with authority to discharge the trust provision. Here, the deed conveying the property to the defendants was not signed by the district superintendent. As such, the deed is and should be declared defective. This I have a huge problem with. When I first read this, I really struggled with it because in the affidavit that the district superintendent signed, stating his side of the whole story, there's no mention of a letter. And what they're talking about is it's in paragraph 2540.3, and it states that there has to be this letter. Now, what is questioned on that is whether or not the letter had to be affixed to the deed. And that's what it came down to. But here's the problem. Going back to when I looked at the affidavit that the district superintendent signed, there's no mention of the letter. There's no mention of him ever doing any of this. And when looking at their brief, they're saying that, look, he never signed the deed. He never signed that this was allowed to happen. And I was livid. I was mad, not just because it was said, but I was mad because I'm like, here's an elder in the church who's lying. I mean, that's how I saw it. And when the local congregation heard about it, they were fuming. They were like, wait, we went through all the proper channels. We did everything we were supposed to. And I was like, man, that's perjury. That's like a lie of omission. However, it's not. And kudos to the law firm that represented the denomination, because if you go back and actually read that and read how it's said, it says that the signature is not signed to the deed, right? It's not attached to the deed. They don't mention whether the letter exists or not. And this comes down to Braunston Literal Trust defense, and it's based on a case that happened several years ago. It was Braunston v. United States, and basically what it came down to is what they are saying in the brief and what the district superintendent said in his affidavit was literally the truth. So nothing was asked of the letter. There was no mention of the letter. They don't say that the letter doesn't exist. They just say that there's no signature. So what they were saying was literally the truth. And so is it a lie of omission? No, it is literally by our legal standards. What they did here was, well done, bravo. But let's look at it from a higher standard, because in James 4:17, it clearly says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. So take it for what it's worth. Here's what we had to do with it. When the local congregation found out that, we were nothing we could do because there's no letter. There was no letter with the deed. We had no proof of this letter. And then the treasurer from the local congregation said, oh, yes, there is. I have that letter because he has yet to come and get the stuff. He's been making me drive around with it in the trunk of my car. I still have it. So she made copies. And our attorney had to present it in court as Exhibit A. Here's the letter. Here's the signature that they said didn't exist. And this is what the whole thing was hinging on up to this point. There was no signature, so it didn't happen. Now, I had to reach out to a couple elders in the church who completely disagree with this district superintendent, which, again, this is another big picture thing to learn about the denomination right now. They can't agree with each other inside the denomination. Those of us who sit on the fringe of it, oh man, we're just pawns in a lot of things that are going on. And so I had a couple other elders, and here's one thing, and this is really important, really, really important to you remember if you are serving in the denomination right now and you're wondering about the split and who's on what side, who's on the conservative side, who's on the liberal side, where are things going? Because I just talked to an elder over Thanksgiving, and he was talking about how he has a couple people in the conference don't even talk to him right now because of the things that are going on. And my issue with this, and this was the hardest thing for me out of this entire process, as I was sitting with my attorney and we were talking about this letter, and he's like, "Where are you finding out all this information?" And I said, "Well, I'm talking to this gentleman and this gentleman. I'm being, led to understand, and they're telling me where the stuff is in the book of discipline." I mean, I had people in the church trying to help me, people in the denomination trying to help me. And he said, "Well, we're going to have to bring them in as witnesses." And I said, "I really don't want their names brought into this. Not for me, but I was concerned for them and their careers." I want you to think, sincerely, that's how I felt. And I want you to think, where does the heart of man have to be that you have somebody who served as a pastor in the denomination, and I watched things on such a level, and I had such experiences that I'm actually concerned for the careers and the future calling of men and women who might stand up against the status quo, the circle of power or influence that this denomination has. That's sad. And I want you to remember that as you move forward with the denomination. So we presented Exhibit A. And the lawyers said, and I don't know who they were talking about, and I don't have the legal, the court documents in front of me. I'm hearing this second person from somebody who was sitting in the room who said, when this paper was brought up and the judge was like, "Well, this is just a clerical error. You can't even sue over this. It's just a clerical error. So here's the paper. He signed it, attached it to the deed. You're done." And the conference lawyers, God bless them, they were good. They said, "At this point, we cannot be held responsible for the incompetence of our employee." I don't know where they were going with that. Those are their words. I'm not going to try and infer anything else into it. That's what they said. And then the judge asked a couple questions, and he said, "Don't you think that this is just retaliation against the pastor?" And you have to remember, this is a really small community. So when we left and we went non-denominational, it was front page, like literally front page of the paper news when we stepped away from the denomination. People knew my name because of us doing this. And it's a small town. The judge knows who I am. And he's like, "Look, this is just retaliation." And they went, no, this is a financial standpoint. That's where we're at with it. This is financial. And they based the house to be worth well over $100,000. Where they were getting those numbers, I don't know. At the time, the housing market right now, it might be worth a little bit more. But at the time, no. So this is the next thing that I want to bring up about the heart of man with the denomination. Because this is what the attorney said in court. No, this is purely a financial decision. So if you are in the denomination, if you're in one of the local churches, if you're an elder, if you're serving on a conference level, I want you to ask yourself honestly right now, without knowing all the facts of this, just this one fact. If this whole thing was all about making sure this was financially equitable, had the local congregation not sold the church to us, had we sold it to that widow, would you have still gone after her? Because the price would have been pretty much the same. Would you have gone after the widow because this was purely financial? That's your only two choices at this point. Either yes, you would have gone after the widow because this was all about money, or no, you wouldn't have gone after the widow because it wasn't about money. It was about the fact that I stood up and defended the local congregation. Those are the only two choices you have in this scenario of how it played out. That's it. So you decide where your heart is with it. So, and that's between you and God. So the next thing that the judge said was, all right, well, if it's all about money, then let's get an appraisal done. All right, fair enough. Absolutely fair enough. We had no problem with that. Because if it wasn't on the up and up, if the money wasn't where it should have been, if we needed to even things out somehow, all right, let's do it. So the appraisal company came in. Now you have to remember that when an appraisal is done, an appraisal is not the same as the inspection. The inspection will not put a value on the home, and the appraisal will not look at all. They can only base things on what they can actually see. They don't do the in-depth stuff that an inspection does, which is why If you go to buy a house, it's appraised for a certain level to see if you can get the loan. However, even with the appraisal value, many times a mortgage company will say, okay, we want an inspection done to see what's hidden in there. Okay, so they're two separate things. We already had the inspection done. We knew what it was worth. The appraisal company came in, and here it is. They appraised it without being able to see everything the inspection company could. They appraised this entire double lot property on a corner lot for a whopping $35,000 appraisal. And that's without seeing the inspection. So, yeah, we were pretty much right on with where financially we were at with this house. And so we're like, all right, so here's the appraisal. We're good. We'll turn it into the judge. We have the signature. Everything was done. We've answered all the questions. We've crossed, we've crossed all the T's. We've dotted all the I's. We're completely open, honest. Here's where everything is. Fine. Here it is. Let's be done. And the conference attorneys were able to get this into what they call discovery. And once something goes to discovery, it can drag on for a long, long time. That's why when you hear that people have been in court for years, it just stays in discovery. And so they'd also made a move that we had to get rid of our attorney, which was fair. This wasn't a low-handed thing by the conference or by their attorneys. This was on the up and up, because the attorney we had actually served both us and the local congregation when the sale went through. And so it's a conflict of interest. He can't then just represent us because he represented both sides to begin with. So fair enough. Yeah, we had to get a different attorney. But so our first attorney and then the second attorney we went to both said flat out, if this makes it to court, you win. They do not have a case. You will absolutely win this when this gets to court. And then both attorneys paused and said, but how much do you want to spend to get this to go to court? And we're like, what are you talking about? And they said, look, now that they have this into discovery, that they're going to drag this out and they are going to bleed you. They have deeper pockets than you do. She even pointed. We had this really cool young attorney. She even pointed like that. And those were her words, not mine. That's not me saying anything bad about the conference or their attorneys. This is coming from, I'm telling you, this is what my attorney told us. They have deeper pockets than you do, and they are going to bleed you. And so we're like, well, where are we looking to end up being? She goes, you'll easily be 50 grand into this before this is all over. And so, my wife and I talked about it. We talked to the local congregation, and we said, look, the whole reason we started this whole thing was to be good stewards, to serve God and to serve the community. And we're not going to get into some huge legal, drawn out, expensive, fight over what comedian George Carlin always said about houses. They're just big boxes we keep stuff in. And so we looked at the attorneys and we said, then we're done. They can have it back. And so they had to give us our initial, price back that we paid for the house. We asked for $2,500, which was less than what we'd already put into the property, which is really funny. And this is another thing to think about, because the attorney has said that their client has incurred legal fees connected to the current litigations, and it is my belief that my client's aforementioned costs will substantially exceed the sum of $2,500. So basically, they paid thousands of dollars to get the house back from us. And so they're like, it cost us thousands and thousands of dollars. So, and please understand, I'm not sharing names and whatnot on this, but if I did, on some of these letters, on every letter, let me put it this way, on every single correspondence on their end, on the conference end, were two law firms mentioned, every one. Their law attorneys in Pittsburgh and then a local one. On some of them, there were two attorneys from the one firm down in Pittsburgh, and then, so there'd be three attorneys on their behalf on every single correspondence. So I have no idea how much money they spent to get the house back from us, which we gave it back to them. And if you watch our video on leaving the United Methodist Church, you know that it all worked out great for us. We moved on, we served God, and we found a different house, another house that we can renovate in a local community. And a new place to meet and do, worship together. So it all worked out for us in that aspect. But here's what's really sad in the closing aspect of this whole thing is they ended up selling the house. Of course, it's public record. It was in the paper, the transfer of deed. When it was all said and done, they got it back from us. They turned around and they sold the house for $22,000. So they gained nothing other than making sure we didn't get the house. And I don't know what their intent was. I'm not making assumptions, but that's the only gain that the conference got out of it was, in my own personal opinion, sharing my own feelings, not slamming the denomination, just sharing my own feelings, is you came after me and you were willing to spend thousands of dollars that is part of apportionments that come from local churches to prove a point that you better not stand up to the denomination. And I'm standing here today telling you that I stood up to the denomination. I defended the local congregation. I would do it exactly the same again. And God has blessed us 100 times over because of it. So that's the story. Here's what you need to know and learn about this interaction. There are literally, as I'm doing the research on this, literally dozens of churches leaving the United Methodist denomination right now. There's like 31,000 churches in the United States, Methodist churches in the United States. And the one report I had somewhere nearly 100 have left in the last year and a half, or 2 years. And most of it's over theological issues. But there's people standing up to the denomination, and it's costing local congregations thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to leave because of this trust clause. And so my prayer to each and every one of you, if you are in a local United Methodist church and you are facing this impending split, is be earnest about where you're serving God. Serve God first, no matter what. And be aware of which side your local pastor is on, because he or she has to choose a side. Everybody's going to have to choose a side on this, or just walk away. And maybe that's the side your local clergy is on, like me. Just walk away. They're going to try and decide and tell you what your building's worth if you want to leave. And my one issue with that is the idea through all of this is that we're supposed to be serving God. We're called to ministry. When I was first appointed, the bishop, he would always say, I'm not appointing you to a church, I'm appointing you to a community. And we can look at how very subjective the Book of Discipline is based on who wants to read what paragraphs and enforce what paragraphs. And we see that elders are very, very rarely ever held accountable for their actions. And I'm dealing with in this whole scenario, an elder who should have been held accountable. And people who came to me later and they knew about the letter, they knew it all happened, and nobody was willing to stand up because everybody worries about their career. There's a lot of people in this denomination who are following a career, not a calling. And so this is why I'm ending with this, because this really bothered me. Is in the Book of Discipline, under this paragraph that they're talking about, the unincorporated local church property sale, transfer, lease, mortgage, there are certain things that have to happen. And I'd like to read this part to you. Prior to consenting to any proposed action required under this paragraph involving any United Methodist Church property, the pastor, district superintendent, and the district board of church location and building shall ensure that the very first thing mentioned, a full investigation shall be made, an appropriate plan of action shall be developed for the future missional needs of the community. That was our whole plan. Financially, we couldn't keep doing it the way we were doing it, and so we came up with a full plan to continue the missional needs of the community, and to this day, we still do it. Number of people in the denomination that talk to me, and followed this in the book of discipline. Number of people talk to me about it? 0. Number of people that want to talk to me about the money and where all the money was going? Yeah. That's how we ended up in court. So if you want to follow the book of discipline, I'd love to have somebody from the conference give me a call and let's talk about the full missional needs of the local communities that are dying because we're worried about, well, you can only serve one master. You'll love one and you hate the other. You know the verse. You pray on it yourself. So that's it for today. I'm sorry if I got a little sharp about all this, but I don't care that I got served, but it bugs me that they just abandoned an entire community. That's sad. So until next time, next video on Faithcast, who knows what we'll do. But coming down the road, there'll be more United Methodist videos, I promise you. So take care. God bless.